John Noe unveils Greater Than We Believe with your host, Stephen King.
Well, hello again. It's good to see you back. I appreciate you being here. My name is Stephen King, and this is my friend John Noe. And if you have already been tuning in before to our series, which is called Greater Than We Believe, you will see that we've already produced 7 videos prior to this. This is video number 8. And so instead of going into a long introduction on this, most of you that are watching have already seen who we are and what we are. I'd like to just get right to the meat. And the name of this particular video today is going to be very personal. It's going to be a story John wants to tell. It's called My Patmos Experience. And I've got chill bumps. I'm waiting to hear about what happened to John on his cruise, on his visit to Patmos. So I'm going to turn it over to you, John. Thank you for having us in today.
Thank you, Stephen. Good to be back again with you.
Thank you.
And today is your day.
I'm looking forward to it.
Because you and I are going to Patmos.
Oh, cool.
And so are our viewers out
Yay.
there. Oh, hopefully. Okay. A little refresher on the timeline here.
Okay.
In our last video, titled What is the Preterist Idealist View?
Right.
I discussed about how I first presented this view back in 2004 at an annual meeting of the Evangelical Theological Society and in a group study afternoon session on eschatology. And then after I had presented my impromptu explanation of the preterist idealist view, preterist meaning past in fulfillment, and idealist meaning ongoing in relevance. Dr. Grant Osborne, who wrote the Baker Exegetical Commentary on the Book of Revelation in 2002, had never heard of it before and asked me to explain it, and I did. And after my explanation, as I contextualized the Book of Revelation for him and the scholars that were present there, he said, I tell you what I'm going to do, John. I'm going to recommend that you write up your presentation of your preterist idealist view and put it in the form of an article and submit it to the editor of the Journal of the Evangelical Theological Society along with my recommendation for publication.
Wow.
And as I shared with you in the last video, you could have blown me away with a feather.
Sure.
Well, I did that, and then 2 years later, in 2006, that article was accepted and scheduled for publication in the 4th quarter of the Journal of the Evangelical Theological Society. And that would come out and be published in January. Be published in December. But in January of that year, oh, by the way, and for those of you who are interested in it, here's a reprint of that article, and it's posted on our website.
Good.
PRI's website, and you can find all the information at the end of the video of how to get a hold of it. And it was titled, An Exegetical Basis for the Preterist Idealist Understanding of the Book of Revelation. I thoroughly recommend it to our viewers' attention. Okay, now, let me fast forward. In January of 2006, out of the blue, Stephen, my wife, who was a state representative at the time, and myself were invited by a person who was a state senator here in Indiana at that time to go with she and her husband and a group of confessing Methodists on a 11-day tour titled The Best of Greece in the Footsteps of St. Paul. And we would be visiting Athens, Corinth, Rhodes, Ephesus, Delphi, Kalambaka, and Thessalonica, and Patmos.
Wow.
And when she came home and presented that to me, I said, no brainer. So we're going.
Yep.
We're going. Now, I have to confess to you that I wasn't viewing this as just a vacation. I looked at this as a pilgrimage.
Sure. Absolutely.
And I was looking at, and a pilgrimage is defined as going to a sacred place, as an act of religious devotion, and some say a pilgrimage is actually going expecting a special blessing, from God. And I was guilty of all that.
Oh, wow.
Because I wanted to go. So I admit that. I'd already been to Israel in 1993, along with Pat and Shirley Boone and about 300 others, and some of them were going there for their 17th time. But I had no concept or feeling that that was a pilgrimage or I was going to receive a blessing. It was research, you know, for a book I was going to, and still hope to write about Israel someday. But let me cut to the chase here. After I returned from this 11-day trip, in which a lot happened, and some things didn't happen. But after I returned, I wrote up an account of what had happened there and what had not happened, so I wouldn't forget anything, any of the details, because so much had happened. And I also wrote up a biblical assessment of what I felt that meant, and what I had received and had not received from the Lord. And we'll cover that assessment in our next video on this. But on this video, what I want to focus on is what happened and what did not happen during my time on the island of Patmos, where John was given the book of Revelation.
Wow.
So that account, I'm going to use my account here for this, for the same reason. I don't want to leave out any details. So if I just was giving this off the top of my head, you know,
forget something.
You know, as soon as we got done doing this, I said, oh, I wish I'd said that. You know, gosh, you know how that is.
Sure.
So the whole account is contained here in my book, The Greater Jesus, His Glorious Unveiling, in the Appendix A here, titled appropriately, My Patmos Pilgrimage and Revelation. So if you're ready, I'm going to share some portions out of this,
sure,
and we're also going to do a show and tell.
Oh, cool. I love show and tell.
All right, great. All right, so here we go. March 26th, 2006. It was still dark at 6 o'clock in the morning on March 26, 2006, as I stood on the top deck of our cruise ship. Show and tell. This is my cruise ship.
Okay.
You with me?
Excuse me. Yes.
Above me stretched a stars-filled sky, anchored by a perfect crescent-shaped moon.
Okay.
Got it? And, oh, forgot this. The brightest star in the sky, which was straight above the perfectly shaped crescent moon. Stay tuned. Slowly, as we approached the island of Patmos.
Is that the island? Okay.
It's the best I could do.
Good, yeah.
That's the best I could do.
It's appropriate.
The island of Patmos, 300 feet in the air.
Okay.
The sea, the ship, the moon, the star.
Yeah.
All in perfect alignment. And as we were slowly approaching this island that is so immortalized in the Bible's last book of Revelation, below, my wife was still asleep, and the 1,100 other passengers were still asleep, or were having breakfast, or something like this. So I came out, and came to the top of the cruise ship, which was open to the whole sky, because I love to do this as we were coming into different ports during the 3 days of the cruise portion of this 11-day tour. And I was standing right out here.
It's an amazing view, I bet.
You remember, hold that for me, please. King of the world.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Titanic. Okay.
Well, I wasn't doing that.
Yeah.
I wasn't doing that.
The view must have been phenomenal, though.
But I was trying to communicate with the king.
Sure.
All right. And I was all alone up here, all by myself. Everybody else was either breakfast or down sleeping. Okay. Alone with my thoughts, as I said here in my account, my prayers, my expectations, which were huge, and my God. For 20 years, Stephen, I had longed for this day. Ever since I had begun actively studying, teaching, and writing about the book of Revelation and the amazing and the amazing conflicting and competing views of that book. But today was my day. Now I'm going to skip forward here to my section, which I call How Presumptuous. Patmos was the prime reason I had journeyed these 6,000 miles from America, but I was not coming as an act, as I said before, of religious devotion or as most go on pilgrimages for. I was coming specifically to receive a revelation from God. How presumptuous. Once again, I was rehearsing in my mind here how 19 centuries ago another John, the Apostle John, had entered this same harbor. And while imprisoned in exile for approximately 2 years, and in a cave, he received the revelation from Jesus that we now call the book of Revelation. But I would only be on Patmos for 2 hours.
Oh my goodness.
2 hours. How presumptuous, I thought, that God would give me a revelation while in this sacred place. And yet I had invested 2 months in prayer and publicly proclaiming that my purpose for coming to Patmos was to receive this revelation. How presumptuous. My church, 3 Bible study groups, my family, and several other individuals were praying for me this way. But what if nothing happened? Or what if I read too much into whatever did happen? And given my high hopes and expectations, how presumptuous. How would I face then, Stephen, those people back home when they would surely ask me when I got home, what happened?
Yeah.
Right? And if nothing of any revelatory significance happened, how could I be honest and tell them so? Even worse, I feared, I was guilty of testing God, as some would probably accuse me. After all, the Apostle John wasn't expecting to receive anything. Well, he was being imprisoned there.
Yes.
But now it was too late to turn back, and I had no idea of what, how, or even if God would do something special and significant enough to be characterized as divine revelation. Next section in my account is titled Signs in the Sky. As I mentioned earlier, as I peered out across the front bow, so here I'm standing right here, into the dark sky and the oncoming sea, the shadowy bluffs of Patmos loomed ahead 200 to 300 feet above sea level. And like twinkling stars across the top of these hills, they were lighted. And on which, at the top of this hill, sat 2 monasteries, the monastery of the Apocalypse and the monastery of St. John, the theologian. And also, and around one of those monasteries was the cave of the Apocalypse, where John received the book of Revelation, as we said. And these lights seemed to float in the sky, several hundred feet above the harbor. And on the crest of another hill, about over here like this, was the large white cross, lit up with white lights. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. Now, here's something really I thought was quite interesting. When I felt a little bit disappointed, because it was totally dark. And the previous day, at that same time, we were coming into the harbor of Rhodes, and it was light. And you could see it. And I love to be on the bow as you're coming in, because it just gives you a great panorama of where you're coming, and just kind of helps orient you. But yesterday at this same time, it was at 6:30, and it was all light, as I mentioned. But the night, just before we came, that last night, the time had changed in Europe. 1 week earlier than it changed, and this is in March, than it changed here in America. And now, because the cabin attendant had slipped us a piece of paper underneath our door saying the time is changing, please move your clocks ahead an hour. So now, at this same time, when it was light yesterday coming into Rhodes, the harbor of Rhodes, today it was dark.
It's 5:30 instead of 6:30.
Totally unbeknownst to us that there was, So here I am at 6 a.m. up there, and so we received that notice, and it's still dark. Interestingly, as I mentioned, in the sky, above the hill, behind the harbor, was the Big Dipper. And as we were still out to sea, about here, coming in at night, the Big Dipper, and this is my Big Dipper.
Okay.
That's the best as I could do.
Sure.
Okay. The Big Dipper looked like it was about like this, and it was about this angle, about that high above the hills of Patmos. Put your finger on that for me. And as we got closer and closer and closer, obviously, you know, the hills go up higher in horizon.
Yeah.
So the effect you get is this.
Ah, they're coming together.
And by the time we got in the harbor, it looked like the Big Dipper, and it was up like this, like it was pouring something out, was almost adjacent to the top of Patmos. So you follow that?
Uh-huh.
It was like this, and it went,
Oh, yeah.
okay.
Which you would not have seen if you'd have waited till a real 6:30.
No.
Okay.
If it had been light, I wouldn't have seen you.
Perfect timing.
Wouldn't have seen that.
Yeah. That's not a coincidence.
And I'm up here all by myself,
Yeah.
praying Ephesians 1:17 for the spirit of wisdom and revelation. Mm-hmm. And I'm coming in here and I'm seeing this. I'm thinking, Lord, what's this mean? And that's not all. Behind us was this. Mm-hmm. And it all, Stephen, it all lined up perfectly in a plane, a straight line plane, like this. Well, like this.
Sure.
It was all like this, all in a straight line plane, in front of me and behind me. What does this mean?
And that star that was so bright was not the North Star, because the North Star is part of the Big Dipper.
Well, and keep in mind, all these signs here in the sky move at different speeds, like the Big Dipper moves across
Yep.
like this. Well, so does the moon, and so do the stars, and they all move at different speeds
And they all converge.
because of their different.
Yep.
And these are all converged.
Wow.
What does that mean? This isn't my title. This is why I titled that one thing, How Presumptuous.
Yeah.
All right, stay tuned. Okay, so here we are. So we're into Patmos like this. So that's what I recognize directly behind me. Initially, I thought that these two signs might have something to do. These two signs might have something to do with Islam, because the flag of Turkey has a perfectly crescent moon and a star on their flag. But the star of Turkey, or on the flag of Turkey, the star is down here.
Okay.
So and by the way, as we're coming into the harbor, directly behind us, about 40 to 60 miles, is the country of Turkey.
Okay.
In which the 7 books, or the 7 churches of Revelation, were
That's
located.
Right. Oh, wow.
And to the further east of that is Syria and Iraq and Iran. But what sense would an Islamic symbol mean to me? And besides this, the star, as I mentioned, this star was located above, not beside. So, but they were all perfectly aligned. So I said, so as I was praying this, Lord, what does this mean? And then I said, stop it, stop it, stop it. I was probably trying to read way too much, into this coincidence.
Okay.
Natural occurrences. Anyway, my revelation from God most likely would come in the cave, because that's where John received his revelation, I figured. So, but my spiritual antennas, Stephen, were up like this.
Oh, sure.
I mean,
tingling, weren't they?
Oh, I mean, it's just eating the air.
Sure.
Everything, just trying to remember, high level of preceptivity.
Oh, yeah.
Probably overly high. I was actively looking for God, how God might give me a revelation for which others and I had been earnestly praying for 2 months. Signs in the monastery. Okay, around 9 o'clock, our group began to disembark. Now, Patmos is a small island, so they don't have a dock. So they have tender boats that have to come out and get you.
Okay.
And go out like that. So we're being ferried to shore. And on shore, we load buses, and then we go up the hills and so forth like that to get up into the above the hills where the cave of the Apocalypse is located, at the top of one of those hills. And it has an 11th century monastery that's built around that, and I'm going to show you some pictures in just a moment, because they surround the cave. It's called a sacred ghetto by the Greeks, because that's where they believe, John received the revelation. By the time my group got up to the parking lot in front of the monastery surrounding the cave of the Apocalypse, there was already a long line of people there. I mean, there was 1,100 people on a boat.
Oh, my goodness.
And other tour buses are already ahead of us, so we had to wait in a long line. And I will show you some pictures here before I tell you what happened in the long line. And I'm going to put my red flag right in here because I'm going to use my red flag during this time. So, and you're going to put these on for everybody, right?
Yep.
This is a picture of my wife and I on top of, can you see that okay? I hope that isn't glaring. On top of the hill on one of the monasteries. This is a picture of her, and can you see that white spot right there?
Yes.
That's the cruise ship.
Really?
Yeah. You can hardly see it, can you?
It's way down there.
That's how high up we were.
Okay.
Now this is the monastery that surrounds the cave. It's a Greek Orthodox monastery. This line was about half of a football field long by the time we got there, so It took us a while to get through there. And this is where you go in, and you got to wipe around and go through rooms, and then go down the staircase and all this stuff. And the cave is located at the bottom of this thing.
Okay.
And which we'll see in a minute. And here we are. I don't know if people can see this, but this is just some of the. Oh, by the way, this was on the Lord's Day. This was Sunday.
Okay.
And what day was John in Revelation chapter 1? What day?
Sunday.
On the Lord's Day.
On the Lord's Day.
We were there, and they had a Greek Orthodox service going on. So we had the Greek Orthodox Church there, and all their trappings, their frescoes and their incense and all that kind of stuff. And here's one of the priests there who's conducting the service. And here's my wife going through. She didn't like the incense because it was so stinging to her eyes. So she went through rather quickly. But I was standing behind taking pictures.
Yes.
And these were some of the pictures I was taking. Now here is the cave. See that little indentation in the wall? I'm going to talk about that here in just a minute. That's the actual cave there. And there isn't much to it. There is another version of it. And you got all these trappings hanging around. And then this is after we come out. And everybody's gone, but that's the entrance that you go in. You go into the monastery and then down the staircases and through the hallways and to get down. That's what it looks like, after everybody's gone. And this was what the parking lot was, and I'll be talking about that in a minute. And then this is leaving the island of Patmos because it was dark when we were coming in, remember?
Yes.
But that's the island of Patmos. And up here is where those two monasteries and where the cave of John was in when Jesus came, and remember Jesus came and touched him and gave him the book of Revelation. I'll talk about that in a minute. And that's my picture. Now I got one more I'll show you here that gives a little bit a better view of the cave. This is a booklet that I bought in the parking lot, which I'll talk about here in a minute. There you can see the cave without people in it, and that's all there is to it. It's about 9-10 feet high, about 9-10 feet deep, and that's it. That's it. There's another there's another view of it. And they have benches in there, and they hold services inside that and right next to it. And we'll talk about that here.
It's about the size of a small bedroom.
Oh, yeah. All right. So back here. All right, so let me pick up there. So here we are. We're waiting in line. And we have a nice young Greek lady who's has our group, and she's our tour guide. And so she gives her spiel. So here's what she says. She says, quote, "During the reign of the Roman Emperor Domitian in AD 95, the Apostle John was banished to Patmos, where he was held for 2 years. It was here that he received the inspiration for the book of Revelation." So far, so good. Well, except for 95 AD. But
yeah, that's what I was wondering about.
Yeah. But catch this. He received the inspiration for the book of Revelation from his professor, Jesus Christ.
His professor.
Professor. It contains prophecies about the end of the world. When she finished her prepared spiel, I stepped out of line and worked my way over to her and asked her, "How do you know the prophecy of the book of Revelation is about the end of the world?" And she frankly replied, "This is the interpretation I was told." I said, "Have you ever heard the view that Revelation was written prior to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70 or before AD 70 and was fulfilled or mostly fulfilled at that time and in this way?" I continued. "No," she bluntly replied. I said, well, many scholars are increasingly seeing this way. I followed up until a rude interruption by about a 60-year-old man, American man, standing next to us who had apparently overheard our discussion, and he said, oh, I don't agree with that, bluntly and gruffly. When I looked over at him, Stephen, anger raged across his face, so I didn't respond at all. I mean, I was not here to engage in debate.
Right.
I was here for a revelation.
Absolutely.
And I didn't want to be distracted by that kind of stuff, or get sidetracked in arguing with other Christians about, eschatological issues about the book of Revelation. I was here to see that revelation from God, and I didn't want anything to interfere, I wrote, in my account or distract me from that. So I thanked my God for her answers and dutifully went back to my place in line and lifted up a silent prayer. Lord, why did these two confrontations happen here? What do they mean? Yes, I was keeping close mental track on every little thing. I'll admit it. Soon it was our turn. But our guide instructed us not to spend much time inside because we had a whole big line. And they were holding a church service down there that we had to walk through. And many others were behind us, and we only had a limited amount of time before we had to get back to the ship. And she also told us to be quiet because there was a religious service going on with the Greek Orthodox Church down there. And that service was right immediately adjacent to the opening of the cave, which was only 10 feet by 10 feet by 10 feet.
Yeah.
Or something like that. So here we go. We go through the rooms and we go down a small circular kind of spiral staircase, real narrow, down to the opening of the cave. And and I'm sitting there thinking, this is why I came. This is why I came to Patmos. And in the cave, where I was expecting to receive something special from God, as I approached closer and closer, I was getting readier and readier. And my spiritual antennas were peak. My radar was on. I was in high alert and paying close attention to everything that was going on around me and inside me. When I reached the small church area immediately adjacent to the opening of the cave, I write, it was packed with local worshipers of the Greek Orthodox denomination, or whatever they call it. The priests were chanting in Greek. They were reading something in Greek. They were shaking incense all around. The odor and smoke stunned our eyes. As I mentioned, my wife could hardly stand it, so she left. She went through quickly and got the heck out of there. And plastered over every square inch of the walls were icons and frescoes. And I mean, it's kind of gaudy,
Yeah.
Kind of there. Ornate silver candelabras, as you saw, with burning candles.
Okay.
Were hanging down from the ceiling. It was like entering a mysterious and somewhat surrealistic world. But one thing was unmistakable, and that one thing was these Greek Orthodox take this place seriously.
Obviously.
And sacredly. And what a contrast, the irony of them and their worship service, and us camera-laden, eye-hawking tourists trading right through, right through the middle of it.
Seems like sacrilege.
Hundreds of us. What an irony, that was. Moreover, the cave of St. John, as I mentioned, could hardly be classified as a cave. It was only about 8 or 9 feet tall and 8 or 9 feet deep and wide, and it left one with a sense of, is that all there is? Well, I snapped 5 quick pictures, as you saw.
Yes.
And then it happened in the cave. And I felt a hand from behind me on my right shoulder. And I thought, this is it. I mean, after all, that's what Jesus did to John.
For an expectation, yeah.
He reached down and touched him. That was no vision that reached down and touched John in John chapter 1. So I turned around expecting to see Jesus. I really did. With a sword coming out of his mouth, or an angel, or something of revelatory, or trumpet sounding, or something around. And as I turned around, I saw this little old Greek lady. And she was wagging her finger at me and shaking her head like this. She said, "No pictures. No pictures." in her broken English. After a few minutes, Stephen, in the cave, it was time to leave. Others were behind us. They were pressing. We had to move on and move forward. As I moved out of the area where the cave was, I turned around, took one last look at the whole thing, and up on top of it, I saw this round, circular, it was about this big around sign, and it was all written in Greek, and that was it. That was it. I had no idea what it meant. That was it. As I climbed back up the winding staircase of the monastery and through its rooms and hallways, I had an empty feeling. After all, nothing had happened. Nothing, at least, of any revelatory significance that I could figure out. On the outside of the monastery, our group held a communion service in the parking lot. We shopped at a small little souvenir stand. That's when I picked up this booklet here that I mentioned, Patmos, the island of the Revelation. And we got back on the buses, and we went to a monastery of St. John further up the hill. And then we had to leave to get back down the ship. At the whole time, from the time we left the ship to the time we got back on the ship, was a little more than 2 hours, and that was it. But I had stood where John's feet had stood some 2,000 years ago in that sacred cave of the Revelation. But I had received nothing, absolutely nothing, that I could recall, or so I thought at the time. Our 11-day tour of Greece continued for another 5 days. We visited some of those other places, and then we had our long 20-hour flight home, and I was so busy during that time and doing other things that I really didn't think much more about my time on Patmos. After all, nothing revelatory had happened, right? Or at least I thought at the time. Let me conclude with this. My revelation of my time on the island of Patmos and in the cave hits me 6 days later on my return home, like a lightning bolt out of the blue. It started during our 4-hour delayed drive from Chicago's O'Hare Airport down the interstate to Indianapolis and culminated that very next weekend. I now believe I have received something very special from the Lord in answer to the prayers of myself and many others, especially Ephesians 1:17 for the spirit of wisdom and revelation. And in our next video, I want to share with you what I feel that revelation is and was, and what I think it means from a biblical standpoint for everything that we've just described in going to that island of Patmos. What all that,
the Big Dipper and everything. I mean, yeah, wow.
In a perfect alignment, and all this stuff goes through the sky, you know. And how that may not have been just coincidences. And what happened in the cave, what happened when we left the cave, and I want to confess that some of our viewers may not be able to receive this revelation. And maybe it may be alarming to them. And if that's you, I would suggest you do not watch our next video. But if I was the rest of you, I wouldn't want to miss the next video.
Yeah. I don't want to miss it either. John, thank you. That's the hair on my neck is standing up because I'm into. You had it in the back of that book. I've already got the book and haven't read it yet. Now I realize it's a good thing I didn't read it because this is all fresh to me. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. For those of you that visited with us today, you'll notice at the end that we're going to have credits rolling, and we're going to have links to the website, John's email address, ways to get in touch. Please stay tuned. Watch the next video. We have 7 others before this. I'd like for you to go through and watch all of them. I just thank you, John, for the hours and hours that you put into preparing for all this. And I'm looking forward to the next video. I hope you are too. And we'll see you then. All right. That sounds good.
All right.
That was great.
One down.